Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital podcast with your host, the Doctor of Digital. Purpose of the show is to introduce you to trends in business, technology, marketing your message, and to meet people you need to know. Did you know that over 82% of new build homes are part of an HOA? Median monthly HOA fees range from $100 in Wyoming, $600 in New York City. 70% of HOA community residents consider living in such communities a positive step. In this episode, we'll discuss the changes and hot topics about HOAs and understand how they work and whether they are right for you. By the end of this episode, you will be better equipped to know what you need to do, and I'm going to encourage you to contact my guest, MeBrandon Barnum. Brandon is the CEO of HOA.com, author of the best-selling book, Raving Referrals, chairman of the board of Champions Institute, and a single dad, something I can relate to, and the subject of my novel since 1997. So with that, I want to welcome Brandon to the program. Brandon, welcome. Glad you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about your background so we know a little bit about yourself? How did you get started in this field in the first place?
Oh, yeah, you bet. Well, thanks for having me. And it's interesting that you bring up the single dad, because that's really what started it. I became a single dad back in 1994. I got custody of my son, and I was only making about $20,000 a year at that point in my life. And I had to make a change because I started bouncing my mortgage payment. So I ended up getting into the mortgage industry and had somebody mentor me in the art and science of raving referrals. At least that's what I call it now. And it was able to 10x my income from $20,000 to $200,000 a year within 18 months. So
awesome.
That's really what got me started.
That is terrific. Now, over the course of years, because now it's been a while, can you tell us what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the HOAs?
Well, in HOAs specifically, we've seen the proliferation of them, right? Nowadays, just about every new construction community is managed by an HOA, as you mentioned the statistic on and the opening. So definitely there is an evolution of them, but quite frankly, HOAs tend to be the community cops rather than the community servants. And that's the mission that we're on, is to revolutionize the industry, update it, make sure that there's communication flowing and transparency in all of the management of the communities nationwide.
I see. Are there some things that, speaking of trends, are there trends that you would say are hot topics? Like, how have they changed? We talk a little bit about the changes, but what are some hot issues in the HOA field today?
Well, if you ask most homeowners, one of the biggest issues is their HOA dues. And what are those dues actually going towards, right? Okay. Here in my community, I live in a community of 132 homes. My wife has recently joined the HOA board because we've lived here almost 10 years since we built our house, brand new development. And yet there's $400,000 that's sitting in a reserve fund. And the HOA board had been unwilling to invest those dollars into kind of freshening up the community with new plants, new trees, new rock around the general area. So that's the homeowner's main concern that we find, is just how's my money being used? They know they're paying into this, but often they don't see the fruit of those funds. And so that's where the communication and the transparency needs to come into play.
That will be one of the things, like, what are the issues or problems? I mean, it's kind of related. So hot topics. So what are those? Are those some of the things that people are talking about at HOA communities currently?
Well, that's what I hear constantly on the street. What I would say is one of the biggest issues is the balance between the policing, making sure that the community is well kept and operating effectively, but then also people still have their own personal freedoms. And so when we move into an HOA, we agree to be bound by those covenants, right? That covenant of how we're going to operate within our community. Okay. And there's always an issue there because people don't necessarily read the CC&Rs before they move in. So they're not totally aware and knowledgeable about what they can and can't do. And so some people just feel penalized or policed as a result. And, you know, it's there to make sure that there's no cars on blocks in front of your home, and that your garbage can gets put out at night, and those sorts of things, to make it an enjoyable experience for everyone. And so that's really the communication that we hear. And then some HOAs out there are operating unscrupulously, where they're fining more than they should, and they accelerate some of those fines into liens. And that's what typically makes the news in the papers.
So who do you work with? And is this people that have HOAs and then join your organization, or who is it that's a part of the community?
Yeah, so for us, we really have three different types of organizations and stakeholders that we're looking to serve. Number one, it's always about the homeowners themselves. So for the homeowners, we provide them information about their HOA. We provide information about their home value so they can come to our website and check and see how much their house is worth. And then we connect them to professionals they can trust. So we say we're building kind of like Nextdoor meets Angie's List meets Zillow. So that's for the homeowners. And for professionals who serve homeowners, we're that intersect. We help them get connected and really serve the local communities. And then we're also, because we're on a mission to revolutionize homeowner associations, we're partnering with existing HOAs and property management companies, helping them elevate their performance so that they better serve their communities.
So what would you generally recommend people look for in an HOA community, and what sorts of guidelines can you provide for them, like good ones, bad ones, or, they actually, like you say, that people don't read this stuff because they want the little text 10-second version. But what kinds of things should be aware of and looking for?
Well, I'd say before you buy into an HOA, you should at the very least do a search and Google that community and see if there's any complaints out there. A lot of people go on Nextdoor or Facebook groups to find and see, what's being said in the community. We're on a mission to create an HOA trust score so that homeowners can see how their HOA is rated. We're working on a survey that we're going to be sending out to each of the communities that we activate to get the feedback from the homeowners that live in that community, because there's not a lot of great data about HOAs holistically. You'll see surveys that are done here and there, but they're typically a couple of thousands of respondents. And we're in the process of creating a nationwide survey to really help not only the local property management company or the HOA board understand how their homeowners are feeling about them, but we want to identify those challenges in each neighborhood so that the HOA can better address the issues and better serve their homeowners.
Yeah, when you say that you have several constituents, and then maybe just even saying what's the purpose of the organization, which you sort of did, but there is no umbrella organization for HOAs, right? So, I mean, they are so independent, which might be kind of the issue. There's no self-governing body or anything, correct?
There isn't, Mick. Absolutely. There's an association of community managers that exists, but quite frankly, I speak quite a bit on the subject, and I always ask people, what's the number one national brand that you think of when it comes to homeowner associations? And I get two answers. Any guesses, Mick, as to what they are?
No, because I'm kind of flummoxed here. I'm not sure what they are.
You just got the number one answer is I don't know.
Okay.
And the number two answer is there isn't any. Those are the only two answers that I ever get to that question. So here we have an ecosystem where 53% of all homeowners in the US live in an HOA, but many people don't love their HOA, and there's no national governing body. There's really very little national regulation when it comes to homeowners associations. And quite frankly, the way that our country was created, it should be about the states and their right to set their own rules and laws. But it's pretty loose, and it's different for every single state. Some states have a situation where people will come in and HOAs will find their homeowners and then they'll lien the properties. And in Colorado, there was just legislation changed because property management companies were actually foreclosing on people's homes solely because of the HOA dues. And that is not a community-based situation that we want to have anywhere in the US.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of an echo of the 10th Amendment, right? That all those powers reserved for the federal government, reserved for the people or the states, respectively. But if you look at our communities, the founding of this country was totally about communities and about
Mm,
the local community because we
right.
were supposed to be self-governing and running ourselves and what have you. I was thinking of this when you were talking, is that if you look at maybe an analogous industry, the real estate industry, there is some compliance issues, but there is a lot of self-regulation. There are real estate companies, there are title companies, and I'm saying the I don't know question. I find, well, I'm brighter than I think, because I can't think of one when it comes to HOAs. They just simply don't seem to exist.
Yeah, and there's some other issues too. Like we're here, I live in Arizona, and here in the state of Arizona, we're working with the commissioner of the Department of Real Estate
Mhm.
because they want us to create a database of all the HOA governing documents.
Hmm.
And when you think about it, the HOAs are the local governments within the communities. That's really how they were formed and how they operate.
Right.
However, if somebody wants to buy a house, typically they can't get a copy of the CC&Rs until closing, when they sit down at the title company or with the attorney that's helping to close the transaction. That's when they finally get to see the CC&R. So realtors can't even see that in advance to know what's being allowed within that specific community. So that's one of the issues that we want to solve, but it's a big issue. We've got a lot on our hands. And right now, what we're focused on is improving the communication and the transparency and the connectedness within those communities, because this is where you live. We believe home is where the heart is, and that starts in your local neighborhood.
And when there are issues, that I think this is probably a thing that comes up, like where do you go, right? I mean, I think this is the homeowner. I think this is the tenant. I think this is really what the people are they don't know what to do or where to go. Who am I supposed to speak to? How do you address those kinds of issues once they arise?
Yeah, so they go to the HOA board. That's the path that they go to. But often those requests and complaints fall on deaf ears, and that's one of the biggest
Oh,
issues that we find. And so we're champions for homeowners at HOA.com. What we are building is that platform to support people and improve the communication, because we believe part of the issue is just the lack of transparency and communication. So if we can improve that, and part of the way that we're going to do that is AI, just, that's helping to automate and eliminate the standard questions that come up time and time again, so that human beings don't have to answer what's already there. People have access to the CC&Rs, but they don't know how that actually works. And combing through all of those legal documents is beyond most people's ability, right? That's just not where they live. They're not experts in the law, and they shouldn't have to be. So we're going to make that access to information better, faster, and more effective, so that people have the answers that they need.
so you're using some sort of AI to interact and say, put all the CCNR on a bot or something, an AI type of tool, so that people can get the facts and back and forth. That's what you're saying?
That's what we're building. That's not available yet on the platform, but that's what we're building. Absolutely, is the governing database, so that we have all of the CC&Rs, the financial statements, insurance, and everything else that the HOA needs, and then creating that interface so that the homeowner can go someplace to get the answers they're looking for.
And the advantage of that, of course, is that once you do that for one, you can start pulling in all of them. So you can get a lot of documents, a lot of CCNRs, a lot of those, which I think would be helpful for the homeowner, for the HOAs, and obviously for tenants and what have you, because they're getting answers right away. Now, when you talk about the organization, what kind of expertise do you offer and what kinds of things? We talked about changes and hot topics and who your constituency, but what do you offer? I mean, if a person is interested in HOA, like what do they do when they go to HOA.com?
Yeah, so when a homeowner goes to HOA.com, they can search for their community, they can search for their address, and they can search for local professionals
Right.
to serve them. So we've got a concept we call hyper local social farming. It's really about building a strong community. We give the communities themselves events that they can activate and host and hold. Like, we just had a community barbecue not too long ago in an area close to me, and I got to go and attend, and it was put on by a mortgage lender and a realtor. They had hosted this event, and they hired a 13-year-old that lived in the neighborhood to go door to door and knock and give people the invitation to the community barbecue. And people just brought out all their own meats to throw on the grill, and the mortgage lender and the realtor, they brought sides and sodas. But what's so cool though is I was looking around, and there's about 50 people from the neighborhood that had come out for this. And the kids were playing basketball, the dads were playing cornhole, there was even a kickball game going on. But for me, the best part was, as I was looking around, not one single person was on their cell phone. Wow. Neighbors were just talking to their neighbors, listening to the music, smiling, laughing, having fun. And that's the kind of connected community that we want to see in this great nation of ours. So we're on a mission we believe people want to belong again. People want to connect again. Not everybody. Some people want to shut in at their homes, and that's okay. But for those that want to know their neighbor and help their neighbor, that's the community spirit that we're bringing to HOA communities nationwide.
And, that's one of the interesting things about what has changed about American life. So my mom and dad, and we used to sit out by our garage and people would walk up and down the street, but now people aren't walking, they're not talking. But,
Right.
It's a famous book by a Robert Putnam in Harvard that he called it Bowling Alone. And it's one of the things he said that back in the day, everybody bowled. Well, when we were bowling, that meant that everybody was interacting and talking and chatting and talking about their communities. And that's something that's just really lost in American life these days.
It is. And it's funny you mentioned that. That's one of the community impact events that we recommend that people do, is even if it's once a month. What if you had a monthly bowling league? Weekly is too much for most people. But if you did it once a month and you either do bowling or maybe Top Golf, and we have 32 different events and campaigns that we recommend that people implement. But it's really about connecting with your neighbors. And, it was interesting. You brought up our founding forefathers. And yesterday I was in a private home in Scottsdale, Arizona, and the owners have created their own museum, and they have original founding documents. And so they have one of the Declaration of Independence it was created about 50 years after the original. So it's not one of the original, I think, 20 that are in existence today. Correct. But I was literally holding the only privately owned original of the I Have a Dream speech from Martin Luther King. And so just these amazing documents. We were talking about the fact that that's how our country started, right? Was being neighborly and really getting connected and empowering the states. And we believe that there will be national legislation when it comes to HOAs, but it's really about the states. And when it comes to the states, it's about our local neighborhoods, right? That's where we live. That's who we connect with. And imagine what the world would look like if everyone were connected. The reason I brought up that home yesterday is that the hostess was sharing the story of Dolly Madison and how she would bring people together, and she would sit people at her table that had opposing political views. Because what she knew is that once they got in a conversation, and they actually talked about each other, they found the common ground. And that's what's missing in America, is too often there's a lot of finger pointing at each other rather than just coming together and finding the common ground.
So, no, interesting historical point, because the salons during the Enlightenment, that's exactly what they did. They get books and they would get people together, and that's how we got the French Enlightenment going. And then the French Enlightenment ideas came over to the United States, and, we got life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's pretty awesome. That's both historic, and it's also really important in terms of community and people talking and interacting and solving problems and stuff. One thing I want to make sure that now we've talked about the changes, we talked about hot topics, we talked about your constituents, we talked about all those things. I would think there's people that want to get a hold of you. So how do you recommend that they contact you? How do they reach you?
Well, the easiest place is HOA.com. If they're a homeowner, they'll be able, again, to find their local neighborhood, to find professionals there, and then they can find information about their home as well. But then if you're interested in having a conversation with me, you can go to MeBrandonBarnum.com. You'll see my links and scheduling link and all that fun stuff there.
All right. Awesome. Thanks for taking some time out. It was very fascinating and historical too at the same time. So a couple of my interests in there. I appreciate that, Brandon. Thanks so much for taking some time out and chatting with us today.
My pleasure, Mick. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So until we see you next time, we want to make sure that what you're able to do is to benefit from all the interviews and people that we have on here, from anything that I always say, from the mundane to the arcane. We cover it all. So if you like the program, make sure that you like it online, subscribe, share it, and positively review on Apple Podcasts. That helps the podcast a great deal. So until next time, hopefully you get connected again. This is Mick, the Doctor of Digital, signing out. Next time, Deus Volt.